The explorers brought ships full of food into the Arctic and died, while the Sámi brought nothing and thrived. Between 1850 and 1915, the most powerful nations kept sending major expeditions up north. Those wealthy and powerful nations kept losing their brave people repeatedly to the exact same tragic disease. Scurvy is not a dramatic illness at first. It starts with fatigue so deep you can barely lift your arms to row. After the initial fatigue, your gums begin to bleed heavily, your teeth loosen, and your joints swell rapidly. The swelling becomes so incredibly severe that walking becomes completely impossible for the afflicted sailors. The final stage of this devastating disease is a total psychological collapse that leaves the victims helpless. Grown men on well-funded government expeditions would simply weep in absolute despair and refuse to move at all. One Norwegian team that reached the South Pole first relied on a very specific diet to keep their crew going. They survived on a diet of pemmican, hard biscuits, butter, sweet cocoa, refined sugar, and warm English tea. The truth is that not one single item on that extensive expedition ration list contains meaningful vitamin C. The famous British expedition that raced the same Norwegian explorer south carried an almost identical food supply. Those brave British explorers arrived second, and tragically, absolutely none of them ever made it back home. The World Health Organization established that 10 milligrams of vitamin C per day prevents scurvy from starting. 10 milligrams is a tiny amount, representing significantly less than a quarter of a single fresh market orange. Yet the greatest and most expensive expeditions of that golden age could not manage to provide that tiny dose. Meanwhile, a few hundred miles north of where those sailors were dying, a unique group of people was thriving. These resilient indigenous people were eating zero fruit, zero fresh vegetables, and absolutely zero supplements. They had been doing exactly this for 10,000 continuous years without ever experiencing a case of scurvy. Western scientists who visited the remote Sámi communities in the early 1900s were genuinely baffled. The nutritional math simply did not work out properly by any of the established dietary models they had studied. They understood that vitamin C was completely essential to human health, and that plants were the primary source. The indigenous Sámi people consumed no plants whatsoever, yet they remained in perfectly fine physical condition. Some naive researchers concluded the Sámi must simply be biologically different from the rest of normal humanity. That was simply the easiest explanation they could quickly invent, and it turned out to be completely incorrect. The true answer was not found in Sámi biology, but rather in their incredibly unique food preparation techniques. It ultimately took Western nutritional science nearly a full century of dedicated research to finally uncover it. The doomed explorers died not because the harsh and freezing Arctic environment completely lacked all vitamin C. They died terribly because their modern food preservation methods destroyed the vitamin before it was even eaten. Understanding exactly how the Sámi avoided that tragic fate requires going back in time 10,000 long years. We must look back to the exact historical moment they chose this specific frozen land and decided to stay there. Sápmi is not a sovereign country, but rather a massive cultural region that stretches across 4 modern nations. This vast territory includes northern Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and the Russian Kola Peninsula. The indigenous Sámi people have lived continuously across this massive icy territory for over 10,000 years. That astonishing number actually predates the famous agricultural revolution that occurred in the Fertile Crescent. While Mesopotamian civilizations were just learning to grow wheat, the Sámi were already surviving in the Arctic. They were already 10 generations deep into an Arctic survival system that required absolutely no wheat to thrive. Today, there are approximately 70,000 Sámi people alive, and actively preserving their ancient traditions. Around 20,000 of these resilient individuals live exclusively within the beautiful Swedish Lapland region. They proudly stand among the longest continuously inhabiting peoples of any single geographic region on the planet. This remarkable long-term historical presence was certainly not an accident, nor was it the result of simple luck. The brutal and unforgiving Arctic environment simply did not ever tolerate foolish accidents or unprepared humans. Temperatures at -40 degrees Celsius can easily kill a fully grown and healthy human in a matter of hours. Just one single bad season without securing enough reliable food means an entire local community is completely gone. And yet the resourceful Sámi did not just barely survive 10,000 brutal Arctic winters, they actually thrived. They successfully raised healthy children and developed their own unique language, beautiful art, and a calendar. They also successfully developed a complex legal system and a rich, deeply spiritual cosmology over the millennia. Absolutely none of that impressive cultural advancement happens when you are stuck in a constant survival mode. You fundamentally need a high level of long-term stability to build a real culture, and the ancient Sámi had it. The foolish assumption that Arctic peoples lived in permanent, desperate scarcity is merely a Western projection. It came from arrogant outside observers who simply never truly understood the complex system they were looking at. Dedicated Sámi scholars have extensively documented that their unique people recognized 8 distinct seasons. Instead of just 4, each of these 8 seasons had a name, a protocol, and a specific set of matching foods. That is definitely not the basic knowledge structure of desperate people who are merely scraping by to survive. That is the highly advanced knowledge structure of a people who perfectly understood their environment's patterns. They understood their complex local environment with much more scientific precision than their foreign observers did. They understood their complex local environment with much more scientific precision than their foreign observers did. So how exactly did they build this successful system? What did they eat? And why did it work so incredibly well? Why did their dietary methods work flawlessly when everything the rich European expeditions brought failed completely? The answer begins with a fascinating animal that the Sámi did not simply domesticate in the traditional Western way. Instead, they formed a unique working partnership with the creature over a long period measured in many millennia. Reindeer are definitely not the most obvious survival strategy because they are extremely fast and migrate widely. They travel across enormous geographic distances, and they are certainly not naturally docile or easy to control. But the Sámi understood something very profound about the reindeer that Western science took decades to see. It actually took Western nutritional science until the year 2012 to confirm this in a laboratory. In 2012, researchers at the University of Tromsø published a fascinating new nutritional analysis. They closely analyzed the exact nutritional composition of semi-domesticated reindeer from 2 northern counties. The specific finding that surprised these modern researchers the absolute most was the surprisingly low fat content. Raw reindeer muscle meat contains only about 2% total lipid, making it one of the leanest meats on Earth. For helpful context, a standard chicken breast is about 3% fat, while rich salmon runs at 13%. Reindeer meat is significantly leaner than almost anything else a hungry human living in the Arctic could consume. At first glance, that definitely sounds like a massive dietary problem for anyone trying to survive extreme cold. How do you possibly survive -40 degrees relying on meat that only has a 2% fat concentration? Biologically speaking, you simply cannot generate enough heat from that, and the brilliant Sámi knew that fact. But the remarkably low fat content was only one single part of the fascinating findings from the Tromsø researchers. The other crucial part of the study completely changed how the scientists thought about the entire reindeer animal. That mere 2% fat was incredibly rich in both docosahexaenoic acid and important alpha-linolenic acid. Those complex chemical names refer to the valuable omega-3 fatty acids that are famous for promoting health. These are the exact same powerful healthy fats that make consuming wild ocean salmon so famous for heart health. The reindeer muscle meat possessed a rich omega-3 profile comparable to that of wild-caught freezing ocean fish. They were comparable to wild fish, not farmed fish, which is an extraordinary finding for a land-dwelling animal. The scientific reason for this phenomenon is not mere genetics. It is entirely based on what the wild reindeer eat. They constantly dig through the thick Arctic snow to reach lichen, wild herbs, and highly nutritious frozen berries. Those specific wild plants contain the exact necessary chemical precursors to form those valuable fatty acids. A reindeer raised on an industrial soy-based concentrate simply does not develop this specific nutritional profile. Fed on a standard livestock diet, it quickly becomes a completely different animal from a nutritional standpoint. The ancient Sámi were not just casually herding reindeer, they were managing a vast outdoor nutritional system. The massive frozen tundra was their farm, and the resilient reindeer served as their biological harvesting machine. There was absolutely no plowing, no planting of seeds, and no artificial irrigation required for this system. The reindeer perfectly converted what grew wild under the snow into a highly efficient form for human absorption. But lean omega-3 muscle meat, as impressive as it truly is, cannot possibly cover everything a human requires. It cannot cover all the biological needs to survive a decade in the cold, let alone 10,000 continuous years. You desperately need vitamin C, you need vitamin A, and you urgently need vitamin D to maintain your bone health. You need vitamin D especially across the dark months, when sunlight cannot trigger its natural synthesis in the skin. You also need iron and vitamin B12 in high quantities that regular muscle meat alone does not reliably supply. The traditional Sámi diet had absolutely all of these vital nutrients, and not a single one came from a green plant. Every single vital micronutrient was brilliantly sourced from a different anatomical part of the exact same animal. This is the specific part of the incredible Sámi food system that ignorant Western observers completely misunderstood. They failed because they were exclusively looking at the muscle meat and completely ignoring everything else entirely. The muscle meat was actually the least nutritionally significant part of what the traditional Sámi people consumed. The lean meat served merely as the dietary foundation of their complex nutritional architecture, not the high ceiling. Understanding that ceiling requires analyzing what the Sámi did the exact moment a reindeer was finally slaughtered. They acted quickly before the animal's body had cooled down and before a single delicate organ was touched by heat. What happened in those very first critical minutes after the kill was definitely not just some ancient magic ritual. It was an act of high-precision nutrition, and it completely and elegantly solved the deadly scurvy paradox forever. The traditional Sámi ate the animal's liver completely raw, freshly harvested immediately following the successful kill. It was definitely not cooked, not dried in the wind, and not smoked over a fire. It was simply eaten fresh and raw. They consumed it while the warm organs still perfectly held everything the living animal had successfully stored in it. Raw reindeer liver reliably delivers approximately 24 milligrams of precious vitamin C per standard serving. That specific amount is actually more than double the mere 10 milligrams per day required to prevent deadly scurvy. That numerical data comes from the identical body of research that documented the actual diets of indigenous groups. It was discovered when European scientists finally stopped assuming things and started measuring the food correctly. Vitamin C, which is chemically known by scientists as ascorbic acid, is an extremely unstable and fragile compound. It quickly oxidizes upon any contact with heat. It degrades heavily in salt, and it disappears during long drying. Absolutely every single preservation method the powerful British Navy heavily relied upon totally destroyed it. Boiling made it gone, salt curing made it gone, air drying made it gone, and modern canning also completely ruined it. The doomed sailors were not eating vitamin C deficient food out of pure ignorance. Their preservation method failed. Their entire preservation infrastructure chemically eliminated the vitamin before anyone understood why it mattered. The Sámi preservation infrastructure was brilliantly built around a completely different and far superior principle. We will soon get to exactly how that worked, but first, we must finish discussing the crucial raw organs themselves. Beyond the reindeer liver, the Sámi also consumed the raw brain of seals, which provides close to 15 milligrams. The nutritional pattern here is incredibly consistent. Fresh organ meat from wild animals is a supreme vitamin source. Conversely, heavily processed, salted, preserved, or thoroughly cooked organ meat does not provide this vital benefit. Western food science had wrongly mapped vitamin C exclusively to citrus fruits and a few specific green vegetables. They did this simply because those were the specific foods European researchers were accustomed to eating and testing. Nobody was measuring fresh, raw reindeer liver in a traditional Sámi lavu tent back in the early 1900s. Because nobody knew what the raw liver contained, the great mystery of robust Sámi health remained totally unexplained. The WHO document on scurvy formally acknowledged that Inuit and Sámi populations remained totally scurvy-free this way. It took until '99 for an international health body to finally and officially confirm this reality. They confirmed what the Sámi had perfectly understood for 10,000 years and practiced without any interruption. The distinction between fresh and preserved food is not subtle. It is literally the difference between life and death. This fundamental distinction perfectly explains every single tragic Arctic expedition casualty resulting from scurvy. They were in the exact same Arctic environment with the same animals, yet they experienced completely opposite outcomes. The fatal variable was not the availability of vitamins. The variable was what happened to the food before consumption. Now here is exactly where the ancient system gets even more sophisticated regarding surviving the brutal freezing cold. Eating raw organs alone still does not fully explain how you manage to stay warm enough to survive 40 below zero. Vitamin C effectively keeps you from dying of scurvy, but it does not keep your body's core temperature from dropping. For that specific thermal protection, you absolutely need real fat. Incredibly dense, concentrated, and caloric fat. And here lies the massive problem the Tromsø researchers identified. The lean muscle meat is only 2% lipid. An active adult in Arctic conditions critically needs more than 3,100 calories daily just to live. Eating lean reindeer muscle meat simply cannot get you to that necessary caloric threshold alone, no matter the amount. The genius Sámi completely solved this severe caloric deficit with a specific part of the animal usually thrown away. They highly valued the rich bone marrow, which European butchers had largely discarded as pure waste for many decades. Bone marrow is not muscle. It is the incredibly fatty tissue safely encased inside the strong reindeer bones themselves. Extracted after boiling, it was eagerly eaten directly from the bone while it was still wonderfully warm and liquid. Reindeer bone marrow is exceptionally dense in essential fat, and it served as the absolute caloric engine that the incredibly lean muscle meat simply could not possibly be on its own. A single reindeer provides enough bone marrow to meaningfully supplement the dangerous caloric deficit from the muscle. The nutritional system was beautifully balanced across the whole animal, effectively preventing dietary deficiencies. There is a second crucial function of bone marrow that the smart Sámi deeply encoded into their unique belief system.